Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the first of our CXO Leadership Live series. I'm your moderator and host for today, Editor-in-Chief of the CXO Exchange Magazine and Media Properties. And I have with me my co-moderator, Thomas Schmitt, Director Engineering Solutions at Empiric.
A very big thank you to all the panelists and attendees for joining us today. So the next segment of today's event is focusing on a topic that's of course a great interest to all of us, and that's why everybody's here. It's the innovation reset and the future outlook in the new normal. So we've got a lot of information and a lot of insights that we want to unpack today with our esteemed panelists that have joined regarding innovation and talking about innovation. But more importantly and more specifically, we want to talk about the innovation that happened during this COVID era. So the question being, what does the future outlook of business look like in the new normal?
I think one of the things that we have seen in this process is that a lot of us really underestimated our readiness to be able to go out and start becoming more digital in our way of doing business. We all kind of were very comfortable in our ways of doing things, paper-based, and a lot of human interaction-oriented kind of a decision-making, lots of in-person meetings and stuff like that. So one thing that we have learned from this experience is that literally overnight, we were able to move away from in-person meetings to Zoom meetings, and we all learned how to use Zoom. We all learned how to raise hands and how to go out and do various things with Zoom. What we also did was we all learned that decisions taken, approvals given on emails, on workflow systems are equally acceptable. You don't need physical signatures, you don't need papers to move around. What we also realized and learned was that at the peak, about 70% of our workforce were working from home. And we actually were asking people now that you need to justify why you need to be in the office and why you can't work from home. And that worked fine. The amount of work we were able to do, the scale of things we were able to do. For example, I was able to lead the largest social transfer payment for Government of Pakistan under their SAS program, whereby we made about 150 billion rupees of disbursements in emergency cash transfer to about 14 million people. All of that, literally in a matter of days, we were able to set up the whole structure, do the development work, get the processes in place, and get the money going. And 150 billion rupees got disbursed to 15 million families. With about 230 odd complaints came to us. Everything else, everybody was happy. So that has taught us a lot of things. And that's what we hope to be able to carry forward as an organization. And hopefully, I think that's what we're seeing increasingly when we talk to others around us, that people have recognized and acknowledged that being able to work from home, being able to work wherever you are, remotely, being able to engage via the digital engagement tools, being able to evaluate things, and being able to use these digital conversations, actually what we see also brought us to become a lot more focused, a lot more concise, a lot more time sensitive, a lot more appreciative of the value of others' time, and above all, extremely punctual. And I think these are a lot of these values that we have learned, and we see, at least in our context, these are going to be significant cultural change that we hope and we expect is going to stay with all of us as we move forward. And that in turn will translate into business model change, will in turn change the way we are structured today. Today, we've got huge offices and buildings and all of that. But we're very actively thinking and contemplating. Maybe a certain percentage of workforce should just not be required to come to office. They don't need to be in the office at all. All our development teams and QA teams and all of those, they have been doing all sorts of new developments sitting at home. So why do we need them to be sitting in office, marking their attendance, holding them hostage from 9 to 5 and getting them to do the biometric attendance and all of that. We've seen people deliver. People have been far more productive. People have been far more responsible and responsive. So I think we have learned few things that going forward, we need to respect the fact that people will respond more if you trust them. People will respond better if you give them the flexibility and the freedom to deliver the end goal instead of forcing them to do it certain way, being somewhere and being bound regardless of whether they are doing something or not. Letting people be able to juggle between their family life, their social responsibilities, and the work life in a manner that suits them without compromising the need of the organization, it works beautifully well. And those are the kind of things we hope and see going forward the organizations will learn. We certainly do hope to continue to build on this learning and definitely change the way we continue to work going forward.
Having a seamless work from home mechanism was possible largely due to robust IT governance and the plan that's been put in place around that. So what are some of the measures or the best practices regarding this that you can share with all of us? And we have again, Rehan and Tanveer, please.
So I think one of the areas where you do investment in technology, sometimes you get ready for the worst, and then when there are certain times, you only realize that you were getting ready for such sort of the scenario. Although I hope this never happens again. But Khaadi as an organization, we actually moved to 100% cloud-based organization back in 2018. And since 2018, the vision actually was to be a global organization which is run completely in cloud, which is where the workforce is mobile and where there is a concept of working from anywhere. So as an organization, this culture was already built into the organization even before COVID. So I think since this culture was already built into it, so there were no disruption in the services, no chaos in terms of how would we work from home. So it was a switch off on one day from office and switching on a next day from home. Number one. Number two, since Khaadi is a global organization, we coordinate with our teams, we connect with our teams, we used to connect with our teams over Teams already. So, so that environment whereby you connect with your teams on video conferencing solutions, so there was a culture whereby if I have to talk to someone who is on second floor or floor next to me, I used to dial Teams and we used to connect on the video call. Only thing that was different was for certain people who were not using the Teams. So that culture was built in. As far as I'm concerned, as far as the organization is concerned, I think this was another day in the world where, at least from working side, but only thing that helped us, as I think Abrar was also referring to, was that the team or those platforms were only used for communication. But with this scenario, these platforms were actually used for active collaboration and the management of the teams as well. So just as an example, we developed an environment whereby the people need to check in at certain point in time on Teams. And then there were need to connect on Teams on certain period of time, so that although you work from home, you have your open plan to work, but there is a discipline whereby the teams need to connect with their supervisor, get the work executed, and then deliver the work again. So that was one perspective. Another perspective that was great was related to learning. So Khaadi as an organization, we are on LinkedIn learning platform. So I have seen lots of users getting trainings on LinkedIn learning during that period, getting certified on certain new skills which were not developed during the working hours. So even myself, I feel that that period was fairly a learning period whereby you can adjust your timings and tasks according to your flexibility, while at the same time be able to learn new skills during the same scenario. Yeah, so this was, I think this was an investment in technology that paid well when it was needed.
So, thank you, Rehan. Just taking up the question what Thomas just asked, and starting off, just would like to echo what Abrar mentioned. When this COVID thing happened, it opened the doors of the virtual reality in true sense. It is more like being virtual a reality that we started living since March in Pakistan, in Karachi, in Pakistan. It was more like a constant change for the last 6, 7, 8 months, and it's been more like about embracing the new interfaces of Teams and Zooms and then all those collaboration tools that were being used across the geography, all across the globe. When it actually came in, initial thing was, it was more like a realization of responsibility because, our company, United Energy Pakistan, being an oil and gas company, it was declared as essential services. So we cannot shut down the fields. Oil and gas exploration has to take place. So it was more of a realization of responsibility from the very beginning to keep generating the hydrocarbon for the country, and then it was the absorbing the shock that we can't shut down in full. So it was more like we have to run, and how, and that was the question that came up. So safety of the employees came in as the first thing, SOPs, testing, quarantine facilities at the field and stuff. We shut down Karachi Islamabad office because it wasn't an operational thing. We moved then people to work from home, and again that was the area where the first impact of that thing started to happen. What are the applications that you can run easily, and what are the applications that need to have people be in the office? As Rehan mentioned, cloudification has been one of the key elements that has actually helped us sail through this period. We have been on Office 365, so Teams was being used. A couple of things, just in terms of Thomas, what you mentioned, what were some innovations we did? We have a program for rolling out Office 365, and the Teams was the one we planned in the last. We started with the Outlook and the SharePoint and the OneDrive, and Teams was planned to India. So, but when this came in the March, we brought that thing up front because we thought it's something going to be of more value, and it proved to be that Teams become the life and death of the people working from home, apart from internet. Obviously, internet is something that is required by each and every one, but that is something that helped us a lot. Similarly, one of the key things that happens, and I think all of us will agree on that, is the communication and engagement with the two components that we came along all the way through. Be it IT, be it non-IT, there was need to have a constant communication and the transparency of the communication. No much of the sugarcoating, being vulnerable at times, that and being honest at times, what need to be communicated and when it need to be communicated. Thorough engagement kept on in terms of webinars, and then HR had been working on the well-being of the mental health and stuff like that. Connectivity tools like webinars and the virtual trainings were kicked in. When I talk about from IT perspective, what my stakeholders were expecting out of me was to keep the holistic technology landscape at the organization up and running, and that's something we make sure that all the employees they need what they need to execute the business. Now, this is what my job is, But frankly speaking, it's just the ante of the poker game. As I said in the chair, my most important responsibility is to be the first and the best living credential in applying and the technology to transform the business. In case of COVID, it went a step ahead. It was not just about using the technology to transform the business. It was more like leveraging the technology to create a difference in the lives of the people who were not able to come to office. They were missing the office over the period of time. And there are certain people, when the minimum manning started off, they were coming to the office, so they were missing their home life, and we all were juggling it together. So that was something in there. A robust infrastructure obviously plays an important role. Can't disagree with Rehan. It is something which is comes in parts and parcel of everything. Virtualization, cloudification, these are key components that actually help us out. And having a proper, the technical platform. From survive, we went to revive, and now we're getting to thrive, which is more like the readiness of the new normal. And that's where we are trying to get in. Eventually, as Abrar just mentioned, there is a realization across the globe that why do we need that capital investment on the land and the offices? Why can't few people work from home? Why can't few people work in a hybrid environment? And yes, it goes, I think, across all the industries. And that's a major change which is brought in.
The HR function has really been the fulcrum of an organization's response during the crisis. When we're talking about health and well-being, we're talking about job security, we're talking about distributed workforce all around. We're talking about these challenges were still the prominent challenges, right? How did you, as those leading the HR function, and my question goes to both you as well as Ms. Alia, how were you choosing, as a people first, economic second approach during the first phase or different phases of this crisis?
In terms of employee experience, a number of challenges, of course, had been there. So when you look at the employee experience in the context of the kind of change that everybody was experiencing, especially I would say that there were phases, and you can actually graph these phases. And one of the component of the phases, of course, was in early, what we saw in January to March. There was a lot of resistance from the employees as well, because this was something which related very clearly to health and wellness, of course, and how we as people first were actually understanding what was going on. And after that, I think a lot of the employees from April to June felt a lot of challenges related to their employment continuation. So some of the major areas that HR needed to look at, one of them, of course, being part of essential services, we had to make sure that we had all our branches open. And we also needed people to be able to not only work, but work safely. So having all the components of safety being put in place, changing the work routines, reducing the number of employees who were actually present, taking it to a minimum where you needed to have the essential staff, but you also needed to have the rest working from home. This coming from an industry which by its very nature is very risk averse, that's banking, has been a mental challenge first for the management and for the BCP teams to go over. And of course, there were very real challenges of how do you give VPN access to employees when they are sitting at home, and there are challenges of risk related to that as well. And then, your working hours were reduced, one of the components. The number of people was reduced. The number of services provided was increased, and there were a number of areas which were added in this. So what we did was one of the key things which really helped the employees was having that confidence that they were not going to be laid off, because this is something which happened in a lot of industries. And in ours, I think we were very clear on where we stood in terms of employees. We stand with our employees, and we are one family, so we need to be together, and we have to make it through all this. So that was one of the first components. And then, of course, we also went ahead and we actually dispersed 100 million as an extra bonus, which was a very specific bonus relating to COVID for all our frontline workers, because our frontline workers were really out there right at the peak of it. And we needed them to feel that we all appreciated the very fact that every day they were also like warriors going out and being able to face everything. And there were a lot of challenges, of course, in that. So having that, when you're going through this whole phase, and all of us have gone through it, there were challenges. So by the end of June, there was a very clear disengagement at a very personal level, going into that desperate or a valley of despair sort of component of mental health. And that's where you needed more support from everyone around you, because there was no one around. There was a lot of isolation. So having webinars, having the president go and face everyone on Facebook, actually have that conversation, starting those conversations where these whole component of caring for you, caring not just for you, but for your family. So we also added another component, which was really something really unique in our industry. And that was that we were not conducting COVID tests only for you and your wife and your children. It was really everyone in your family, everyone with you is covered, and we'll pay for it, but we need to have that component in place as well. And then, having that component of rationalizing what's going on, being able to be there as mentors, being able to say that we are all in this together, but we'll all sail through it as well, through these tough times, and we will make it through. So, and creating more and more, obviously, every one of us have gone through the digital component in terms of how quickly the transformation has taken place in the banking industry, especially towards the digital. It would have taken years, it has taken months to go in that direction, and I think everybody understands that very well. So holding hands is the first part of being there as HR, being people's person, and being there for everyone. Then providing them the security in terms of jobs, providing them a further incentive to be out, also appreciating them through rewards, listening to their concerns, adjusting the atmosphere, all the components of the real risk that everyone was facing in terms of security and safety and health and wellness, from psychological, psychosocial support and all these factors. So these multiple areas you had to manage and look at, and manage not just that we are taking care of one thing which comes to it, but much more proactively. So going forward, a step forward and 10 steps forward, and this has been the approach. Thank you.
We did a lot of those things, and something that one should be proud of under normal circumstances is something that we garnered revenue, maximum revenue in our history in this particular COVID year. So COVID came as a, I wouldn't call it a blessing, but it was a new way of working. So more or less organizations that have fared well have followed the same kind of trajectory. First and foremost, companies that had invested in information technology infrastructure reaped the benefits. Secondly, aligning the partners, so including the banking sector, because had the banking sector not been as robust, I don't think we would have fared so well. From payments to vendors, from procurement, from payments abroad, and salaries. So one of the things that we ensured was that salary was not delayed, not even for a minute, from the normal trend that we had. We had also introduced COVID-related allowances, because for us, there were two kinds of workforce. One was within our factories, because we were essential food items. The other was our sales force out in the market. So our sales force was exposed to the extent that they had no support covers. So every time, and we did face certain, I wouldn't call it government, because the government had made the concessions. However, trickling down of that information down to the police station level was proving a little difficult. So we did have some of our employees picked up by the police, arrested for a day or a night. So a lot of work from the PR and the government relations and the head of security went in to ensure that our vans were not stopped, logistics was not stopped. We did the initial, so we divided it into 3 phases. Immediately when the lockdown happened, prior to the lockdown, we had imposed the SOPs, but work was as normal. Our biggest chunk of workload, and we did not reduce the hours. In fact, people worked overtime of their own accord. So while the benefits of information technology were realized, Tanveer has an idea of what National Foods has been, because he's been one of the pioneers to start the journey. But it came as a bane for a lot of us, because one team would shut down and the other team would set up. So our work hours started from 8:30 in the morning to 11 and 12 at night. We were producing round the clock. So COVID allowance was there. Being a food company, we ensured that there was free food for anybody and everybody who was on our premises. there were bonuses, there was a salary increment, and the bonuses were for all the people. So we had our quarterly bonuses, we had a variable pay, we had COVID allowance, then the SOPs, then the testing services. Plus, what we did was it helps if everybody is targeting the same objective. So we set up a COVID fund where every penny that an employee contributed, the company matched that. So that set the wheels of motion in terms of people associating with the overall environment outside. And every time that a sale was made or a unit was produced, the person felt that connectivity with what is happening in the country and how they're contributing. A lot of free distribution of food to different charities. Dr. Bari is here, so we, with the help of Indus Hospital, we've put up high dependency units also. So the objective is not just COVID, it was to sustain the efforts that we were making. And of course, put in policies of work from home. We had an agile working policy, but we realized, but the hesitation was there that how will people work? Will we be as productive? We've actually numbered more productivity during COVID because I think people felt the responsibility, which in an office environment, people tend to shirk. So a lot of time is spent in, taking breaks and having discussions. Meetings on Zoom were far more focused, far more productive, and we've continued. So a lot of our learnings coming from COVID have continued. So it has set up a new system of operations in the company. You don't need to force feed people to complete a project. People are actually now taking the responsibility. And the company is looking to adjust its policies to reward that kind of behavior. Another thing that we did was ensure that anybody and everybody who was uncomfortable, we had a replacement coming in and going out. Plus, the top team ensured that they were physically visiting the premises. So the entire top team made it a point to be there, including the board members, at all our locations, at least the manufacturing plants, because other markets was not as simple for us. You needed to get a lot of permissions, and we didn't want to put our sales teams in any additional trouble. So the allowances, the bonuses, the free food, the extra transportation. And what came as a surprise was that a lot of people who are working with our third-party service providers actually doubled up their own. So there was an allowance for attendance. So people actually started adhering to the SOPs far more than they normally would. And there was constant communication in terms of how well the company was doing, so that people were assured of the fact that there was going to be no job loss.
Saira, you made a point about consulting with Dr. Bari, and initially that's what we were trying to get him to talk. He's here with us, and I'd like Dr. Bari to take this up. A lot of businesses, they had to have their health safety plans in progress. They had to have a health as well as business continuity side of things. But while we're sharing the business side of things, Dr. Bari, I'd like you to talk about how COVID has had organizations rethink how they approach health, safety, and security, and in keeping that in mind, what the future outlook of the new normal looks like.
Pakistani nation is a very peculiar nation. In the normal days, we are basically disintegrated. But when in pandemics or any natural calamity, we are united. And with this, we saw in this pandemic also. The corporates came over, the general public came over with rations to be distributed. And we had to basically, at Indus, what we had basically was the quality and the other thing, which was the quality, and the other thing, which is basically is our IT setup. So we were fortunate to have a negative pressure areas which we dedicated for COVID unit. And we started working, we established a 20-bedded COVID unit. But as the pandemic increased, the wave increased in mid-June, the situation, the infrastructure, health infrastructure of the province of Sindh was bad, rather all of Pakistan was bad. And we wanted to add up more beds. So we from 20 to went to 80 beds. And for that, we needed support for HDU, National Foods, then Angro Food, then other organizations came forward. And we were able to raise our numbers of bed to 120. And then we established a container base around almost about 50 bedded unit, which is now, we have now moved all patients to, as the patient number is going down, we are there. So the collaboration, and people were asking us, the corporate were asking us the SOPs, we were sharing SOPs with them for the well-being of their workers also. And we were providing testing services to them also.
Is there any innovation or any technology that you implemented to deal with the safety of your workers?
Innovation, generally, first thing that comes to our mind is normally putting up some new tools and gadgets in there. The very first challenge that we have to face was to reduce the exposure. And when we say we cannot shut down the fields, which means the fields has to operate, which means the people has to come, rigs has to operate, the oil need to be taken out, gas need to be taken out from the wells. And it do require not just the number of people who are there on a permanent payroll, there are lots of contractors and the partners who are working on the field as well. And we have to make sure that all of them are actually following those SOPs and making sure that those things, starting from their how they take the food, up to how they interact, how they meet. And in the Pakistani culture, meeting and handshake and hugs are part of not just our culture, it's also part of some of the values that we carry. And it was too difficult for the people to restrict themselves when they come up together and you don't shake hand, you don't go closer. So lots of trainings went on in that part. Lots of, there was a constant reminders, methodologies in terms of webinars and virtual meetings, not just in team meetings taking place in the smaller groups, but also across company level. There's been a constant communication coming in from the leadership team, and specifically talking about these specifics like, initially there were days when things were not very clear what to do. There were times when the people were discussing we should keep the shoes outside the house. And there were times when they realized, it's not that thing. We need to have three key things that we need to make in place: the mask and the washing of the hands and the social distancing. But we have learned those things over time. And during those days, lots of innovations were coming up. Lots of newer ideas were coming up. There was, we used to have a daily crisis management committee meeting take place daily, even on Saturdays, Sundays, Eid, holidays, and where we were reviewing the data coming in from the various sources. So we were just not just data coming in from the official sources, we were trying to get the data from the hospitals also. We were engaged with the Inam hospital, and just getting what are the number of beds available in case the pandemic goes beyond the limits where we're seeing it. Similarly, the news coming in, and even frankly speaking, we were getting the data from the graveyards also. Those gorgons, we call the person who put the dead body into the grave. We used to get the data from those gorgons to actually know is the numbers real, where the number of deaths are happening with the same pace as is being reported in the media and the various other tools. So there are lots of ways of cross-check and analyze those data. There are lots of graphics, a lot of analytics going on at the same time, wherein we're able to churn down the data, whether what's to get the noise out of and filter the noise out of the real voice. So those innovations were coming in. Similarly, it was more like a continuous evolving process. We started off when there were times when we used to have one single communication coming in at a particular time, and then there was loads of communication coming up. There were more of empathy coming into those areas. There were lots of HR coming up with all those sort of programs that just Saira mentioned in terms of mental health well-being. They need to be done. There were doctors being called in. There were physiotherapists being called in and giving those lectures in that. So those technology actually helped in terms of connecting the global teams together as well. There were people coming in from the abroad and telling us what are the do's, what are the don'ts, what are the learnings, especially for the people from those countries where the pandemic has actually passed through and we were the late entrant into the thing and we were waiting for the spike to happen. Like the same way, like currently we are getting into the second wave and we're still struggling whether it's in there, it's not in there. And there are always, I still recall there was a time when the question was started coming up, whether the doctors are telling the right thing or not. There was a lot of press conference came in. Dr. Barisov himself was been there, and he was telling, why should we be telling lies? So, as a culture, when Dr. Bari mentioned as a culture, we do come up together when the pandemic happens or when the crisis is happening. As a culture, we also don't trust anyone. And that's the biggest challenge that we don't trust the people who are the experts. So if, for example, in case of digitization, if you go to the organization and want a couple of $1,000s to put up some investment in technology, then again, the whole process of justification goes on, which is required, which is necessary. But again, it's also element that someone who knows the thing well should be given the opportunity to do those. So the doctors were the authorized people who tell what's right and what is wrong, and those things eventually helped out. So innovation, not in terms of putting up a gadget that can do some sort of a ringing the bell when some people get closer in 3 feet or together, not as such. We did evaluate a couple of things in terms of having those door access, wherein instead of actually you have to put up a thumb, because we closed down the thumb scanning part, and we just stopped that. Only the RFID cards were being used to enter on need basis for the minimum during the minimum manning days. We were evaluating, okay, if we need to make a count, okay, how many number of people need to be there at a particular time, at a particular floor, then that count need to be readily available. So those type of information was made handy for the teams to work through. Things like cafeterias were closed, and you get the food from the from one particular caterer and things like that. So there are various smaller changes which we were learning and adopting and evolving into it. And that's what the whole learning of last 6 to 8 months, which will be a big source of survival for us into the thrive mode as you go into that particular mode and use those learnings and transform that into a new norm, which we are spelling out.
Okay, thank you. Hey, Alia, how about you in the branches? I'm thinking that the people behind the counter at the desk had to be really worried during this time.
Yes.
Did you have to inject any technology or innovation to make them feel okay?
Right. So the first and foremost thing, of course, in terms of technology is having access to digital banking. So what we did was there was a very much more focus on digital banking and for customers to opt for branchless banking. So this was something that already was in place, but what we did was communicate more on media about how customers could actually utilize it more. So I think that focus on the customer side in terms of utilizing digital banking services and the communication around it, because the tool was already there. So we didn't actually develop the tool at that time. It was already developed, but the utilization actually increased manifold because of that communication. So that was the component in terms of branchless banking. But other than that, there were a number of digital platforms which we actually initiated at that time relating to employee services. So there are certain services within our employee services area which were at that time not really.
Saira, can we jump to you? Did you have to do anything specific in the manufacturing facilities to protect your employees?
Okay, Thomas, we are a food organization, so innovation in food does not happen overnight. Yes, but in terms of the processes that were adopted earlier and the processes that were adopted during COVID and now post-COVID. So as mentioned by a little bit by Tanveer and by Alia also, implementation of the SOPs was extremely important. And as Dr. Bari had put in, we are a nation with each individual having a mind of its own. Initially, people did not believe in COVID. They thought it was a farce. They thought it was a political gimmick, X, Y, Z. So getting the people to adhere to the SOPs was a little difficult. And that is where management had to step in. So each one of us had to step in physically to show them that we were also adhering to the same policies. Making concessions in terms of providing on-site food, which earlier people used to bring from home. So there was no food being brought out from outside. Switching to technology overnight for things that we would have usually, and in an ideal situation, panned out over the course of the year, such as we did have the RFID cards in place, but we were still working on the thumb imprint into for entry. So switching that overnight, shutting off attendance. So it was more in terms of more like a warlike situation where we shut off attendance. And people ensured that there was no bypass of the attendance and they would actually come register themselves, and move on. Getting the testing done on premises. So we liaisoned with Gets Pharma. They had testing kits. So we had the doctors put in place. All manufacturing sites require doctors. So we doubled up that headcount in terms of every shift having multiple doctors and doing random testing. At the same time, what a lot of people may not have experienced was, because we were food manufacturing, we were constantly being visited by the government authorities. Getting all those licenses in place by every labor director who was coming in, we were having the commissioners visit us, uh, actually helped put us tighten our. And when the people saw that we were going through this, and every time we passed a clearance and we got the certificate, we exhibited it on the notice board so that people realized that they were contributing to it. Um, so those were some of the things, apart from all the other things that were being done. And it was commendable, again, repeating Dr. Bari's, the way that the police architecture helped us. Initially, yes, the first week was chaotic because everybody was trying to help, but we were at opposite tangents to each other. After the first week, once the system had more or less streamlined, we had gotten the Pakistan Business Council to help us get the contacts with the ministries. The local police was a tremendous help. So every transport vehicle that was commuting either products or personnel was supported. There were road blockades. The police of that area would ensure that our factory buses, our factory employees were escorted, even where there were instances of protest. So we are very, very grateful to the government authorities. And in Gujranwala, the police commissioner, local commissioner, helped us distribute food also. So actually, the police spared their policemen. After duty, they would go with us into the villages and ensure that everything was documented. And for every visit that was being done by the government authorities, the police was there to support us.
So Saira, you talked about, it's COVID has taught us that it's really difficult to do long term, but we do want to give credit to all of you who've survived this period due to their agility and business modeling and remodeling and, adapting to this crisis. You guys are the ones really who have survived this long term, and, if there is long term is even a thing anymore. I'd like Inam Saab to take this to an innovative disaster recovery point of view, and if there are any measures that your organization has taken or will be taking were there an emergency again.
Thank you, Aqsa. First of all, honestly, I wish it doesn't happen again. But one thing that we've learned through all of this is that the worst is possible, and it's possible within our lifetimes. And what has happened once may happen again. I think we have got the experience of China, where we have had SARS, and then we have had MERS, and then COVID-19. So these things seem to be around us, and I guess there has to be a grudging realization that we have to live with these things, and we are in it for the long haul. And I think that's something that's very important for us to internalize. This is not something that's going to go away just because we wish it to. And whether we have a vaccine, whether we have X, Y, or Z, I think we better get used to this life. Now to your question, I think, we thought long and hard about it, and the whole question was, what is this disaster recovery, and what is this business continuity? And so what's our most valuable resource, really? I mean, it's not the data, it's not the information, it's our people. So when we start to look at it in that perspective, then and I really love what all of the panelists have said about how you've really taken care of the people in each and every one of your organizations. And I guess that's what makes all these organizations so special in the first place, that you put people first, always. And so I would just say that the biggest question that we started asking ourselves was that, there are backups for technology, move something to the cloud, have offsite this thing, have business continuity plans, etc., etc., etc. But what do we do with people? And what do we do for backup of people? And that's a really tough question, because I'm quite happy losing a computer system, or my system crashes. I can live with it. It's maybe an inconvenience for a day or two when the backup comes in. Khuda na khasta, you lose somebody in your team. That's bad. I mean, that's seriously, that to me is the worst case scenario. So we said, yeah, but this is life. People, it's an unfortunate reality of life. Pandemic or not, we will lose people. Pandemic just sort of accelerated the whole thought process on that. And we said, okay, so if our most expensive and valuable, and I hate to use the word resource, but the most valuable thing that we have, or the thing that we value most, are people, then what do we do? I mean, clearly we have to invest in the health of people. We know that there is enough empirical evidence now outside Pakistan also that people who've got good health, physical and mental health, have actually been able to survive this slightly better than others. And I've got Dr. Bari and others who are much more qualified to actually speak on that. But this is what we see. We've seen that even in Europe, etc., barring the age thing, people who got predominant pre-existing conditions, or who are just weaker in constitution, have been much more susceptible to such a thing. So so let's think about it in a sort of a larger sense, and we say, oh, we've been focusing is on people coming on time and punching in and then logging out and all of that, and how they're performing. No, we have to think much beyond that, which means that we have to take care of their physical health, and we have to take care of their mental health, and mental health especially, and not just mental health of the people, but of their families. Because if there's any imbalance in the force, as we see, it does impact everybody else. Somebody unhappy, unwell at home, it impacts everybody. So the realization is that this is not a static machine or data that we are talking about. We're talking about people and families and the whole social structure. So the responsibility side has certainly become very, very big from where we were. And once you start to sort of step back from the daily concerns about Zoom crashing and internet cable being disconnected under the sea somewhere, you realize that there are much bigger problems. So for us, it's been, how do we ensure the well-being, the wellness of our people? And B, khuda na khasta, if there is something that's going to go wrong, which is beyond our control, then we need to have better succession plans, for example. That's not the only thing, but better succession plans, more multidisciplinary training. Leadership skills became more and more critical. So what we did was that we actually thrust people into leadership situations. And I'll differentiate between leadership positions and leadership situations. We put them into leadership situations. So there is a crisis management committee. The crisis management committee is not headed by the chief executive or by a C-suite person. The crisis management team is actually, even a TH, is headed by a mid-level manager. And that guy has done the most phenomenal piece of job. I couldn't have done it, honestly. I just couldn't have done it. I probably don't have the capability, the empathy that he showed, and everything. So it was a lot about putting people in leadership situations, and you find out how people perform in such times of crisis, because this is a time of crisis, and these things will keep coming up. And once we said, okay, so we've got something going on the people situation, and then we said, okay, so what about technology? Yeah, we practiced with Zoom before. We'd actually shut down before before the country actually shut down. So we'd been practicing with Zoom and work from home, etc., etc. But what we found out very quickly was that this is a luxury. This work from home. This is a luxury that works for people, sitting around this conference or attending this webinar. For most of us, this is just not possible. I mean, let me give you a simple example. We've talked about, literacy, work from home, kids going to school from home, working on their computers and tablets. The numbers from Punjab, there are 30 million people in the Punjab public education system, 30 million children in the Punjab public education system. There is only 1 million kids in the private school systems. And what do we hear about? It's how the private school system is doing and the private school system is doing that. No, what about the 30 million kids who can't even go to school and not get an education at home? Well, who's going to get them a smartphone or a tablet or whatever? I mean, it's just not going to happen. So the whole argument is that, you know, when you start looking at these things, you have to think perhaps slightly bigger than your own office and everything. But since this is a lesson that we have learned, so I'm very happy to share these lessons. But in our office, what we found out was that, you know, 20-30% of our workforce, especially the ones who were in admin and support roles, did not have smartphones or did not have any possibility of connecting to a Zoom or something like that. So we went out and we gave smartphones to a bunch of people. But that was also possible for a small company, 100 odd people. You know, you can go out and give smartphones to 20 people and not really dent the budget, etc. But that allowed us to, you know, stay in touch and stay in communication with everybody. But when I try and scale it, and I see the size and of the challenge and of the issue, we came to realize, you know, that working from home is not really sustainable for most of the people. It's okay. We can talk about it. It's privilege of the privileged, but it's not really going to work. And what we have to see is how do we get people back home, back in the office very, very, very quickly. And we'll talk about that at greater length. And then we've been, you know, doing some scenario building and some things to figure out what are the various kinds of crises that can happen. So, you know, and we're now looking at a much broader range of crises, including wars and larger catastrophes, etc. So there's a lot more work going on in that sense. I think people who are really involved with technology are perhaps better qualified to respond to what can be done with technology. But I would just wanted to talk about the human element.
This challenge was as much about technology as it was about people. So on a standard basis, we do have our business continuity planning and all sorts of things, and but that would always be focused around, you know, what if your systems did not work? What if some of the people could not show up at work? How will you manage? But nothing was planned for something like this. And what this experience has taught us is that your crisis management has to be multi-pronged. It has to be about people. It has to be about your internal systems and processes. It has to be about your shareholder. It has to be about your customers. Because as a bank, when we look at our branches, that's where a walk-in customer is what we deal with. But at the same time, we deal with our corporate customers. Those customers were having their own challenges, and we were expected to be able to support them in their difficult times as well. The regulator was coming in asking us to work with the corporate entities to support them in terms of their salaries for their staff, rescheduling of the loans, etc., and all of that. And all of that work had to be done, again, by our people. And we had to enable them to be able to do that without forcing them or expecting them or asking them to show up at work. And all of them had to be done against certain deadlines that the government and the regulators were putting out for us so that the industry could continue running. Industry did not have to go out and lay off lots of people because they had to service the debt that the banks had given to them, you know. So for us, it was a challenge from multiple dimensions. And a lot of learning that came to us was that, you know, when you say that people need to stay at home, then you need to enable them. So we ended up buying about a few thousand laptops that we had to give to people so that they could stay at home and work. We had to enable more than 1,000 VPN connections so that they could connect with us securely without risking the sanctity and the integrity and the security of our platforms, etc. We had to engage the services of doctors, hospitals. Our crisis management team every single day would keep track of every single employee in the bank if they were affected by COVID. If they were, then we would connect them with the doctor. We would reach out to the hospitals and make sure if they needed to be hospitalized, they were taken care of. We had to think of, okay, if that means they're going to be having to take days off, then give them the comfort that, these days off will not be docked against your leaves. We had to also think of that their loved ones could get affected by COVID. So we came up with interest-free loans so that if their family members needed to go to hospital, because the hospitalization cost was very expensive for COVID treatment. So we immediately came up with those kind of things so that again, people had that peace of mind. So what the learning was that it's not just about technology, it's not just about putting some systems, it's not about just getting a crisis management team together. It has to be multi-pronged. It has to be thought of with a lot of empathy from your customer perspective, from your staff perspective, from your corporate customers perspective as well, who in turn have their own other customers. So indirectly, what we were doing was also going to impact lives of tens of thousands of other people who were employed by other industries out there as well. And we had to make sure that we were able to deliver for them without putting our own people at risk. So creating awareness among the staff, enabling them to be able to work from home, encouraging them to not to come to office, creating awareness among all the supervisory level that it's not important to force people to come to work. It's important to see what they're delivering, what they're able to deliver. So a whole thought process had to change. You had to become far more empathetic about people. You had to think about your processes. You had to think about your policies. You had to think about technology and not spend a lot of time worrying about your expenses. Because at that time, it was more about doing the right thing by the people and enabling the people and worrying about the costs later on. Because the cost of an IT equipment can be recovered over a period of time, but the cost of lives is not something that you can recover. So that decision had to be taken very quickly. So I think it was all in all a very enriching and enlightening experience for all of us. And we definitely hope that we're able to carry on with these learnings going forward. And we do bring certain fundamental behavioral changes that we were able to exhibit here and not just forget about them as things get back to being more normal.
So, Dr. Bari, is there anything you'd like to add to this?
Very well said by Abrar. It's the people, it's the life of the people, and you have the safety and security. Being in a healthcare sector, we were on the frontliner. We were not the frontliner. Rather, I always used to tell that we are the last line of defense. The frontliners are the people, the public. They have to behave. Unless they don't follow the SOPs, all load comes to the last line of defense, which is the healthcare workers. And they knew they were in the midst of the situation where they were dealing in a COVID unit. They are all prepared. They are covered with PPEs, but there's not a lot of the virus in that environment. So, and they knew what are the consequences of they see people dying in their hands, and they knew what is the end result of it. So taking care of them, providing some recreational activities to them, and then also giving them mental support by the psychologist, and also giving them some incentives also. So, and fortunately, we had many, about 300, more than 300 employees of Indus Hospital got infected with COVID, but none of them cashed from the hospital. They got from the community. So where they were relaxing their SOPs and mingling with other people. So one other thing which I think so, and the support of the corporates, because the food industries, the McDonald's and all, they also came up with all sorts of their products and providing to the healthcare workers. There was I think so, the first patient was there on 26th of February, 8 p.m. And I got a call in the 8 a.m. in the morning from the CM house that there is an emergency meeting of the task force regarding COVID. And during that meeting, they were able to, within 12 hours, they were able to trace the contacts of the person. They got hold of the visas issued from Irani embassy for last 3 months. And that was a pleasant surprise that, as Saira also mentioned, that the police helped them. For the first time, I saw the administration working, the police working, everyone was working. And we used to have a task force every single day from 27th of February, 7 p.m. in the daily till March, mid-March, when we started COVID, the lockdown. So it is the people. So you have to, and delegation of the power to the different level of leadership.
So as we're turning towards the future outlook, we've seen some global research that has said that analytics and data are considered vital when we're looking at the post-COVID business recovery, as well as also employee safety and well-being. Because all of this is helping employees return to the workplace, it's improving customer experience, it's addressing supply chain issues, it's improving cost and IT optimization, as our panelists, Tanveer and Rehan have also talked about. And it's also helping people and organizations make better business as well as human care decisions. Salman Saab, my question to you would be, as we are turning towards the future outlook, how do you see AI become a part of our future and to handle such crisis situations were there to be any in the future?
Thank you, Aqsa. I first of all would like to say I've really enjoyed hearing all the speakers talk about the challenges that they faced and how uniform the view has been about what's most important, which is the people. I think with regards to technology and how technology can benefit, and particularly AI, we've heard a lot of the panelists talk about how this crisis helped hasten the digitization or the digital transformation across their organizations. And that's something that's been seen all over the world, not just in Pakistan. I believe we are in the midst of the first wave of digital transformation, which has increased reach, which has improved processes, which has boosted productivity, and which has also laid the groundwork of what's possible in the future and is starting to happen. Companies are focused on creating the right context for, digital initiatives to take root. There's buy-in from, senior leadership, and there has been a lot of investment around the underlying IT and data infrastructure. We heard about, companies moving to the cloud and embracing that, and certainly the, data, large amounts of data is easier to store in environments like the cloud than on physical infrastructure at each company. And then, of course, companies have also, been forced to adopt a different culture as a result of the current crisis that we're facing, and adopt faster skills that perhaps they were not yet ready to take on, but have had to do so. So while big data and analytics and the infrastructure supporting that are very much powering this first wave of digital transformation, it's artificial intelligence that will drive the second wave. Companies are already, starting to gather and process data in different ways, whether it's data that's being generated by industrial plants, or it's data that's being generated through customer preferences and customer interactions, in online applications in banking. It's information that is being collated constantly through the Internet of Things, right? So you've got lots of devices, lots of interfaces that are interacting with end customers or with suppliers or vendors, and processing data, and all that data is now available to be used and leveraged. And it's this data that enables companies to start to rely on artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence brings far more radical changes than just purely digital. Digital is moving away from paper onto an electronic format, and AI systems leverage the data generated through those electronic transactions or interactions to build models that replicate our behavior, or the behavior of machines, or the behavior of things. And so AI systems are going to be far more transformative. The adoption of AI in industry is going to be far more transformative, because more than digital, AI systems have the ability to make decisions and ultimately to even take action. And that's what the future looks like down the road. The use of AI is, of course, already at a fairly advanced stage in several industries, such as media or retail, also known as e-commerce. Companies in which companies in these sectors can precisely measure the preferences of customers because of their interactions. And AI is penetrating more industries and more processes, as people are starting to look at efficiency, within their processes, are looking to automate more. The automotive industry is undergoing significant changes as a result. Self-driving cars are now a reality. You have companies, industrial companies that have brought in artificial intelligence for mining companies in drilling more effectively, in predicting the results of those drillings. Industrial companies in predicting how long a machine's lifetime is, when maintenance cycles are due. All of those things have gone from experienced, a few people that had the experience to guess when those things would happen, to now becoming more of a science with a greater degree of accuracy and predictability, ultimately saving not just money, but also lives and the environment. The more you reuse, the more you use, extend the lifetime of things, the more you save the planet as well. So in my view, the two questions that you asked, the first is about AI becoming a part of our future. In my view, the future of work is X plus AI, where X is whatever you do. So AI is going to be a part of everything that we do. It already is a part of a lot of things that we're doing. It remains to be seen how quickly companies will adopt AI and how pervasive it will become. I think it does depend upon the importance of AI or being just digital for competitive advantage in any industry, as well as the maturity of the company itself. And I think this current crisis has helped accelerate companies towards that path. With regards to the second part of your question, how AI can help deal with such crises in the future, AI has already been utilized widely to deal with many aspects of the current pandemic. For example, medical and pharmaceutical companies have leveraged AI and machine learning to vastly accelerate the processes involved in first identifying the key characteristics of this virus, and then to develop targeted therapeutics and targeted vaccines eventually, much faster than ever before. It's just not been possible to do this without the amount of digitization and AI that's available. That's available now. We can do it now. Of course, public health organizations across the world have used AI models to predict, what happens with the pandemic across their populations, where it spreads, how fast it spreads, track and trace, taking the data from track and trace and extrapolating that, as well as how countries can optimize the use of resources such as ventilators and even hospital beds across the country. How you can match supply and demand in those cases. AI models have helped with that. We at Empiric is a software company, have looked at how we could utilize AI to help many of our customers who were being challenged during the pandemic of trying to trade off between continuing to be productive with keeping their employees safe. And that's not a trade-off that any company should have. So we focused on what we could do to help companies keep their workplaces safe and their employees safe. And in order to do that, we leveraged computer vision AI, and we developed models that help our customers to be able to, in real time, monitor the compliance of their COVID-related guidelines that keep their workplaces safe. Things like we know that the infection of COVID can really only be stopped by social distancing and face coverings in the absence of a vaccine. And if you just exercise those two things, in your organizations and in your companies, you can drastically reduce the infection across your workplaces, and hence also the disruption to your business or to the productivity, of your people. And so we leverage computer vision AI to help our customers monitor in real time whether people were wearing masks, face masks, whether they were wearing them correctly. We help them monitor whether anybody on site is violating whatever social distancing guidelines you put in place, if it's 6 feet or 3 feet, and we send alerts. We send alerts to whoever is responsible for monitoring a particular space, a floor, a factory, a branch, and we have the ability to send alerts to employees as well. This inculcates a practice in people when they receive alerts or when they're told that they've not been doing something properly, to start to practice it and do it more properly. So it creates a culture and a behavior of people just putting into practice things that they are being told and being trained on, but they require a little bit more to do so. It helps companies to really gauge through accurate and objective data what is the risk of infection in their workplaces, and helps them pinpoint through the use of dashboards and heat maps, where the problem areas are, where a company can then do some targeted education or put in place some specific physical barriers or measures, that will just reduce the number of social distancing violations or face covering violations, and so on. We also help monitor occupancy levels in a particular space. So if there are more than X number of people, that would be considered crowding. And, again, we send alerts out. So we're doing, our bit to help keep, our customers' workplace is safe through computer vision, artificial intelligence, and this is something that's being used in corporate offices, and it's being used in industrial plants that now not only have a good understanding or an accurate and objective understanding of the real risk of infection in their environments, but have also reassured their employees that they're doing a lot more to protect them from infection in the workplace. So they reassured the employees that this is a safe place to come back in. And more importantly, here in the United Kingdom, where I'm talking to you today from, and in the rest of Europe, it's allowing governments, to balance the trade-off between keeping businesses open, but also protecting populations. So it's a way to be able to manage the risk, associated with the infections in the environment. And really, for businesses that we have seen in the food processing industry here in the UK, there've been plant closures, several plant closures. The main and in a number of those closures, when infection spread in large numbers, the infection was spread by asymptomatic people. So people that at entry points whose temperatures were not elevated, who themselves felt fine and didn't feel sick, they passed all the screening criteria that companies had, and yet they were infected, and they came in and they infected hundreds of people in factories here. So it's to protect against that we have to make sure social distancing and face coverings guidelines are in place, and for businesses to monitor them all the time and in real time, and be able to assess themselves as safe environments for their employees.
Thank you, Salman. And we've got one more question to go here is, and this, I'd like to start off with you, Rehan, is how many of you would say your organization has been using analytics to respond to the challenges that have arisen from the pandemic? And how do you see the integration and use of data in your next phase of normal life? So if you could start us out, Rehan, but that question's open to the whole panel.
Okay. So I think most of the participants have already focused on the need for information. In fact, again, as a responsible organization, what we did was we started, so there were certain cases in our organization as well, whereby people got infected. Some passed the test, some were positive, some were negative. So what we started doing is that we started doing two sorts of activities, right? And these are the times whereby you find the need for that analytics in order to make few business decisions whereby that data was not needed in a normal scenario, right? So when you go into a phase whereby which is the business is not as normal. So for the retail industry, we have never seen such kind of a precedence whereby the stores were not available, the customers were not shopping, but customers were willing to shop from online. So since we have presence in UAE, GCC, UK, Pakistan as well, so we had to analyze new trends of the data, which we have never seen and which we have never worked on in order to make those decision makings, right? So most of the factors were related to how much we sold last year, what should be the inventory position for this year. But frankly, lots and lots of effort went into new data generation points or new data points, which when combined with the historical data should be able to generate insights related to the new normal. What should be the inventory need when the stores are not running? And by the way, in our industry, we order the inventories good 5-6 months before the actual product gets into the store. So this was the scenario where you have to create a scenario which you have never seen, but based on what's happening currently in the world and what has happened in the past. You have to merge that data and you have to reach a correct number of inventory which would sell for, let's say, next 6 to 12 months. And you have to start working on that data. You have to depend on that data to make sure that whatever you do in the new normal is consistent with what has to come in next 6 to 12 years. And honestly, I would say that we were not ready for that. So there is lots of business intelligence, lots of data analytics that happens into the organization, but we never did jumped into such a scenario where there are statistics, where there are analytics, which so let's say if you have 5 years of data based on which you have planned your future, and your future is not a representative of your past, then you have to collect new data sets for which you have no experience of what would be happening. But luckily, having that data or analytical or fact-based decision-making mindset that helps you in making sure that you don't take decisions on your gut, that this issue would resolve in 3 months, if this issue is resolved in 6 months, or this issue would resolve in a year. So what we did was we actually had to create multiple scenarios that if if this problem gets resolved, let's say in 6 months, what should be the inventory levels and even what should be the pricing levels at which we should be offering these products to the customers. So whole new data set based on which we had to make decisions. But I think this is not the time whereby you take decisions based on your past experience and based on your guts. It's fairly mandatory and fairly necessary to generate or to look at the other data points and other data factors which are even not related to your own market. So from one side, you get the feeling that e-commerce is booming. Let's say, I'll just give you an example. So from market data, what you get that you see that e-commerce is booming. So e-commerce used to be a 10% share of the market. Now it's 15% share of the market. And you get excited that since the potential is huge, you can order lots of inventories, but you have to see what's happening in your sector. So if e-commerce is booming, whether that e-commerce boom also is made apparent by the fashion and apparel, or it's only groceries. So we had to, in fact, on certain instances, buy that data set which was not relevant even to your market. But ultimately, that data helped us in making some very critical decisions. If we would have taken those decisions.
Rehan, I'd like to add one thing here that, on what you've said is that we need to really process, understand, and analyze what we have collectively experienced together during different phases of this crisis, because you mentioned, the beginning and now how we've had to sort of navigate it all throughout the different phases. And use that information to influence how our peers or how our organizations are moving forward in new ways and constantly innovating, because nothing's the same as it was, say, even a month ago. So, we're not just, we cannot just go back to what we were doing in the past, ignoring what COVID-19 has taught us on a personal as well as professional or organizational level. So this obviously presents an enormous opportunity for the HR function, for the IT function, for the business function. And this is, an opportunity for all of you and those who are listening in today to influence how your people work, how organizations will function, how we will better make use of AI and technologies that are coming up in the world, and prepare better, with a human-centric approach as we move forward. So that just helps us sort of tee up the last thing that we want to discuss today. And the floor is open to all of you, and we'll get closing comments on this before we move on to Dr. Bari. Is that how will institutions and organizations thrive post the pandemic?
So I'll just take it up. I think what we have built in over the last 1.5 hours is more like about what this experience of COVID environment has taught us. And I think one of the things that we talked about is that it has taught us about being a true human being, and there's been a whole lot of difference in the quality of relationships now what we're having with our teammates, with our colleagues, with our business sponsors, with our stakeholders, and within our family, because working from home also gave a lot more time to spend with family while you're working. So So that's one aspect of where the experience of living in COVID environment has taught us. But there are two more things which I personally believe, and I think Rehan touched upon them, and Salman explained it in much more detail. Is more about being flexible and agile. It's something that is we are now going into the phase, and in this time of unprecedented changes, it's very crucial to adopt quickly and to embrace the new technology. AI is, when people used to talk about 6 7 months back, even it is more of people think, even in the literate people think of it as a luxury, not even realizing that the Siri in the iPhone is also an AI component, not even realizing the Google Maps are actually working on the AI, and not even realizing lots of things. But now this has actually given us the realization that it is crucial to adopt quickly, embrace the new technologies, and just change our mindset also. I'll just share an example building upon what Salman Sir mentioned is like in our fields, we have plants and that need to be operated. And, we wanted to reduce exposure, which means we want to make it a minimum people of actually going and getting the information from those plants. So why can't we have industrial internet and IoT, those actually get all those information which is currently been captured manually or on Excel. And once we get it, then we come up in some sort of what we call the digital command and control center. And that's what we are trying to work on. So that's where the Thrive thing comes in. We do our planning and looking into those AI-based areas where not just taking into analytics, but using some sort of a Python-based algorithms to actually dig out the data from those humongous amount, get the information out of that humongous amount of data that we already have. So I think that is something, having the agility is going to be the true competency going forward of any effective remote work, I must say. It could be the saying, for example, the days to come of new norm that we've been seeing, it could be one of the measurement of one's productivity could be done based on the agility. And agility means embracing these technologies with a much faster pace and actually giving it a try at least. And we have seen when these things are tried and then they work out to be more beneficial. And it doesn't cause into the element of actually, there was a classical concept that when AI will come and the jobs will go away. We have seen the jobs going away right now, and we are anticipating lots of jobs going away in 2021 globally, because the way the pandemic is going to stay and by the way the other things are actually impacting it. And so it's not just the AI is going to take the jobs away. It could be the pandemic like these that can take the jobs away. So sometimes you need certain things and tools which will enable you to actually move fast and act faster and decide faster. So this is something, my 2 cents is to be more flexible, more agile, be it a technology, be it a human relationship, be it more of a, what do you call them, that change of mindset has to come to move from a time-oriented to the task-oriented setup sort of a thing.
Just to add to what Tanveer Saab was saying, just one component, I think, in terms of agility, at least that I can see, in terms of the way human beings actually relate to agility. We look at it from the concept of organizations and how agile the organizations are in this VUCA world, how quickly we can adapt, how quickly we can also understand that this is just one of the pandemics which has come in. It may be something which has hit us as a huge stone, but then there will be others. And this may not be going anywhere. So there may be superimposed by other challenges of similar nature and similar magnitude. So I think the internal thought process which we need to look at essentially requires that we look at all these components, and organizations need to integrate agility, innovation, and really hit the ground running at all times and be able to transform as we speak. Because if you look even 15 to 10 years back, a number of really top organizations no longer exist. And this can happen. We may, from the organizational perspective, become extinct pretty soon if we are not able to understand where we stand. With this, I'm sorry I have to move because I have another meeting. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to actually connect with all of you and the participants. Sorry, I can't take any questions, so I'll have to take off right now. Thank you so much.
If I may just take a crack at this, I think, and I won't repeat some of the very, very excellent points that have already been made. I think one of the common themes that we have to look at is that for any economy, and especially an economy which is as fragile as ours, when we look at the sort of global picture of Pakistan as an economy, and then our place in the global sense, we need to get people back to work. We need to get people back to work physically. We need to get people back to work safely. We need to keep them safe. For me, the biggest use of technology is going to be how do we keep our people safe and more productive. I think that for me is the biggest concern right now. How do we get ahead of the pandemic? Once you find somebody is coughing, or once you find somebody has a fever, it's already a little, late in the equation, a little late in the day. You find them, and then you also find a lot of people who are asymptomatic, etc. So for me, I think it's a good challenge to throw back towards the virologists and the doctors, and of course the technologists like Salman and Tanveer and other guys who actually are, and Thomas, who understand how to integrate all of these things and get us back to work. I mean, it's a given. We can't hide our heads in the sand and pretend that this will go away. We have to learn to exist with it, and which means that we have to learn to exist with it for not just ourselves or our companies. We have to learn to exist with it for our customers, for our children, for our families, for our neighbors, for the 220 odd million people in this country, and I've even lost count, 7.5-8 billion people around the world, because anybody can be a vector, and then it just it just goes on and on. So yeah, I think I would be really looking at the technology guys to figure out how we can exist with this thing. I think Dr. Bari has said on this forum and earlier forums that this is a reality. You can't just wish it away. But what we can do is be prepared for it and keep updating ourselves in terms of technology. So I really look forward for the next iteration, you guys. Thank you.
Aqsa, I heard what Alia had said and Tanveer had said, and then what Mr. Inam has said. AI is going to be extremely important. However, people are going to continue existing. We need to continue being empathetic. But what we need to start doing now is we need to see alternate forms of employment. So as AI becomes more robust, organizations would have lesser and lesser jobs, but lesser and lesser jobs in the organized sector. So things like the crowdfunding platform that the SECP has approved today is a step in the right direction, and organized in organizations like us, HBL, Bank of Punjab, or Empirical, where so more and more alternate sources of employment will have to be brought in. So for example, we are a food company. Our food gets translated into different stakeholders. So there is the organizations like Food Panda, where people are buying food which is pre-prepared by others. So how can we help create jobs if we are not giving jobs to more workers at our plants because of more PLC machines? What do? We create in-house employment. So the COVID has actually given us an opportunity to experiment with a lot of new kind of work, because the population is not going away anywhere. And if you start shortening this lifespan of employment, you will have a lot of security problems in the country or anywhere in the world. So in order to curb that, the organized sector would have to start looking at smaller budding platforms to support. And the entire supply chain would have to be reviewed once again. And bits and pieces of that supply chain would have to be supported so that people start earning, and that otherwise we will hit the depression. At least we have started it. We believe that we will have lesser and lesser jobs within National Foods as an entity, but we will have more specialized skills jobs. So the element of vocational training would have to be focused on. and organizations need to start looking at that either from their CSR platform or public-private partnerships. So that is one area. At the same time, with lesser people, the need to be more empathetic, to be more flexible in terms of how people operate. And I remember somebody mentioning the KPI-based way of working would now become more, I think Salman did, so would now become more the need of the hour as compared to a long term, a year to 3 years to 5 years. We don't have that kind of time anymore. So the entire compensation benefit strategy, the entire way that an organization works will have to be reviewed because the time spans have significantly reduced.
Absolutely. Abrar, if you'd like to add something to this before we move on to Dr. Bari's closing.
Yeah, thanks. I think most of the things people have said, but if I was just to identify a couple of points, I would believe that going forward, we will become far more data-driven and data-enabled organizations. We will also need to learn to move away from monolithic technology platforms to more modular, more microservice-based platforms, so that we don't need lots of people coming together to make any new change. We are able to do small things in small teams, and we're able to make those changes happen quickly in an agile manner at a much faster pace with an involvement of very small teams. We will also need to educate our customers a lot more, and we will need to empower them a lot more to be able to do most of the things digitally. And hopefully, as the economy moves towards becoming less cash and more digital, that will make our lives more simpler and easier in order to help move the customer towards becoming more empowered in terms of the way they take their decisions, the way they go out and manage and control their finance. And the fourth thing this experience has taught us is that going forward, the importance of staying connected, being able to stay connected with your team members, and being able to communicate. I think what this experience has taught us is no communication is enough. You can never over communicate. It's okay if you feel you're over communicating, communicate, engage. That is going to be very critical going forward, because as you become more digital in your engagements with each other, you start to lose some of the value of those human interactions. You will need to compensate that by becoming far more aggressive, far more high frequency in your communications, in your engagements, and in your reach to a whole range of the organization, and far beyond your immediate set of teams or your immediate set of people that you manage.
Dr. Saab.
Thank you for such a lovely discussion, knowledgeable discussion, listening to so many good people. First of all, regarding the analysis, healthcare has always been a data-driven and analytic. And the success of Pakistan in combating, controlling this pandemic has been the testing, tracing, quarantine, and then analyzing it on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, and then reacting to it and doing first strict lockdown, then coming to smart lockdown, and then micro lockdown. So on the surface, which appeared on the media, there was disconnect between the federation and the provinces, but internally NCOC and the provincial task force were one, and data was shared on the national level and analyzed, and actions were taken. There were, as you say, when there is a crisis, there are always opportunities. We have to, unfortunately, when we were hit with this pandemic, the health infrastructure was fragile. Why it was fragile? Because our healthcare budget has been 0.7 for so many decades. So the healthcare budget has to increase. at least 3% of the GDP should go into the healthcare. US, and they have about 13 or 14, 15% of their budget goes to healthcare. There has been a very good private-private partnership, private-public partnership, and this should continue. Then telehealth, the world has changed. Post-pandemic world is different, and we have to learn to live with this virus or with any pandemic. And since we have to be prepared for that, technology will definitely play a role. Telemedicine will be the norm. There should be some control on social media, because that was very negative thing which has affected this pandemic. So the other problem is we were dependent on everything from the equipment or testing kits or VTMs, or we have to import. So this has provided an opportunity to the industry. The PPEs, we are now preparing, manufacturing PPEs in Pakistan, world class, they are exporting also. So we have developed ventilators, started manufacturing ventilators, monitors, ultrasound machine, and we have to be self-sufficient on all these things. Unless we do that, it will not be possible to. So this is basically the other thing which is important to balance in workplace and family life. The pandemic has taught us.
So Thomas, if there's something you'd like to add here.
No, I just wanted to applaud that. I think that's one of the main takeaways. It's the balance. And all of us have learned it every single day in the last 7 months. So I really applaud that comment, Doctor.
So with that, we're ready to close our event. We did have some questions, but they were, I think, already answered. There was one on cybersecurity, which was already answered by Rehan and Tanveer. We are happy to wrap up now. Thank you very much to all our panelists for joining in today. If there's anything that you'd like.
One thing which I have to emphasize, that the design of the building, the offices, the hospital has to change. So sensor-driven doors, least touching to the walls and the doors. So it should be.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think some of our speakers have really touched upon the innovative technologies or measures that they've taken. And as Dr. Bari rightfully sort of wrapped up the session, and he talked about how all of it has to be not just human-centric, but how we are using data, analytics, technology, and all of that, and basically putting all the pieces of the puzzle together. Everything that we've learned in the last couple of months has been, I think, eye-opening for each one of us, even if we were doing the same role for a couple of years. I think it's been a learning experience for all of us. So thank you to all our panelists today for sharing their insights, their best practices, to those who were joining in as attendees, who also able to take away some valuable insights, best practices from the industry. With that, Thomas, if you'd like to make a closing comment, and we'll end the meeting accordingly.
I think you wrapped it up pretty good. It is. It's a mix.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you. Wa shukriya. Allah Hafiz.
Allah Hafiz.